Hello and welcome to Nooblets Explain. In this episode, we'll be building our empires and conquering our opponents. Join us as we explain Imperial Settlers. To set up the game, place the scoreboard in the middle of the table and place the round marker on the 1 space. Then shuffle the common cards and place them face down next to the scoreboard. Next, each player chooses a faction. Each player places their faction board in front of them, shuffles their faction deck, and places it face down next to their board, and places their faction's point marker on the 0 space of the scoreboard. Select a player to go first and give that player the first player marker. You can select this player any way you want, but we like using rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock. Then, starting with the first player, each player draws 2 cards from the common deck and 2 cards from their faction deck. You are now ready to play. There are several types of cards in the game. Production cards will produce additional resources for your empire during the production phase. These cards should be placed on the top row of your faction board. Feature cards give the player's empire additional powers during the game. They should be placed in the middle row of the faction board. Action cards allow the player to perform the action on the card if they have the resources to pay for it. These cards are placed on the bottom row. To activate an action card, the player places the required number of resources on the card and does what the card says. All cards have a construction cost, indicated in the upper left corner of the card. The player must pay the resources indicated to build a card. Some cards also have a reward for raising that card in the upper right corner. This is usually only available on common cards. However, the Japanese faction cards also have this feature. We'll talk about raising cards in a little while. Cards also have a road color on them, indicated by the color bar on the left side of the card. There are some cards which give you points or powers based on the number of a certain color of card you have built. Most cards will have 1 or more stars on them. These stars indicate how many points that building is worth if it is still standing at the end of the game. Cards will also have a description that indicates what power or resource the card gives you. This is located in the middle of the card. Finally, some cards will have a Make a Deal section on the bottom. This indicates what resource the card will produce if you use it to make a deal. We'll talk more about making deals later. The game is divided into 5 rounds. Each round has 4 phases. In the lookout phase, each player draws the top card from their faction deck. Then the first player draws a number of cards from the common deck equal to the number of players plus 1 and places them face up on the table. So in our 4-player game, 5 cards will be drawn from the deck. Starting with the first player and proceeding clockwise, each player selects one of the face-up cards to add to their hand. The remaining card is then discarded. Once again, the first player draws cards from the common deck and places them face up. But this time, the last player selects the first card, and then each other player in reverse order selects a card. Again, discard the remaining card. Note that there is no limit to the number of cards a player can have in their hand. And now the lookout phase is complete. Now we come to the production phase. In this phase, players will collect resources from 3 different sources. Starting with the first player, each player receives all the resources listed on their faction boards. Then they receive resources from any deals they have. Finally, they gather resources from any production locations that they have in play. Cards' resources can be drawn from either the common deck or the player's faction deck. Victory points are collected by moving the player's score marker on the scoreboard. All other resources are collected from the common supply. Now it's time for the action phase. This is when you actually get to do stuff. Starting with the first player and continuing clockwise, each player performs one action. Then each player may perform a second action. Players will continue performing actions one at a time until all players have passed. The actions a player can perform are: build a location. To build a location, the player selects a card from their hand that they wish to build. They pay the resources indicated in the upper left corner of the card under Pay to Build. These resources must be paid from the player's personal resource collection. Then the player places the location in the appropriate location row next to their faction board. When you build a production location, you immediately gain the resource listed. Also, some cards may have special abilities that give you a one-time resource when they are built. Make a deal. For this action, the player chooses one card from their hand, pays one food, and places the card under their faction board with the deal section showing. Then the player immediately gains the good that the deal provides. Raise a location. You can either raise a common card from your hand or raise a location that an opponent has built. To raise a card from your hand, select a common card that you want to raise, discard that card and one raise token, and take the goods from the supply that are indicated in the raise section of the card. To raise an opponent's location, select any one of the common locations in their empire. Discard 2 raise tokens and take the goods depicted on the raised section of that card. Then flip the opponent's location card over to turn it into a foundation. Activate a location. This action allows the player to activate one of the action locations that have been built in their empire. To perform this action, choose the location you wish to activate. Pay the required goods by placing them on the activated card and use the card's action. The goods paid to activate the card stay on the card until the end of the round to indicate that the action has already been activated. Unless the card says otherwise, you may only activate an action location once per round. Spend workers to collect resources or cards. For this action, you may discard 2 workers to collect 1 resource from the general supply or draw 1 card from either the common deck or your faction deck. In one action, you may discard multiple pairs of workers to gain multiple resources. For instance, you could discard 6 workers to collect a wood, a stone, and draw a card. Defense tokens. During the production phase, each player will gain a defense token. At any point during their turn, a player may place the defense token on one of their locations. This does not count as an action. The defense token will increase the cost to raise that location by 1, making it harder for your opponents to destroy your stuff. Cleanup phase. Once all players have passed, the cleanup phase begins. During the cleanup phase, do the following. Use any storage abilities given by your faction card or location cards to store the indicated type of goods. Discard any goods, workers, and tokens that have not been stored. Pass the first player token to the player on your left. Move the round marker ahead 1 space on the round track and then begin the next round. At the end of the 5th round, the game is over and scoring takes place. In addition to victory points that players may have collected from actions during the game, they will add the following to their final score. 1 point for each common location and 2 points for faction location still standing in their empire. Note that some faction cards will also award players with additional victory points, so be sure to pay attention to those. The player with the most victory points is the winner. If there is a tie, then the tied player with the most workers and goods left is the winner. If there is still a tie, then the player with the most cards in hand wins. If there's still a tie, then we suggest the tied players play rock, paper, scissors, lizard, spock to determine the grand champion, because that's the coolest way to break a tie. Anyway, thanks for joining us to learn to play Imperial Settlers. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for more gaming goodies. Until next time, game on. Cards also have a powers based on the bleh. Note that there is no limit to the number of cards in a player. What? The game is divided into 5 rounds. Each player draws oh my gosh. I have to do that all over again. Note that there are in this phase, players will to store the indicated this is gonna take all day. Oh, I like that. Rock, paper, scissors, spot. Whoopee!